"You aren't a daughter anymore, Sophia. You're a liability." The words didn't hang in the air. They fell like ice, shattering against the freezing glass of the car window. Outside, the world was a void of white. Aspen at 10,000 feet doesn't forgive mistakes, and it certainly doesn't forgive weakness. But this wasn't a mistake. I watched my father's silhouette through the frosted glass. Richard Vance, the man currently polling 5 points ahead in the Senate race, walked away from the vehicle with the easy confidence of a man who had just taken out the trash. Beside him, my mother, Stephanie, adjusted her fur-lined hood, never once looking back. They reached their waiting SUV, the engine already running, warm and inviting against the biting cold. I tried to reach for the door handle, but my fingers wouldn't obey. The cold had already started its work, but more than that, they had disabled the controls. My wheelchair, the extension of my body since I was 12, was now just a cage of aluminum and plastic. The car's heater sputtered and died, the silence rushing in to fill the space where the hum of the engine used to be. The temperature was dropping fast, -10 degrees and falling. I watched the taillights of their SUV fade into the swirling snow, 2 red eyes blinking out in the darkness. They didn't speed away in a panic. They drove slowly, carefully, navigating the treacherous pass with the same calculated precision they applied to everything else. The frost began to creep across the windshield, intricate patterns of ice that looked beautiful if you ignored the fact that they were sealing me in a tomb. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My breath hitched in my chest, forming a small cloud of vapor that dissipated instantly. There was no point in wasting heat on tears. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what the weather is like there. Hopefully, you're somewhere warmer than I was. Hypothermia is a fascinating process if you detach yourself from the dying part. It starts with violent shivering, the body's desperate attempt to generate heat. Then, the shivering stops. That is the tipping point. That is when your biology quietly files for bankruptcy. I sat in the silence, my breath no longer fogging the glass, because the air inside the car had equalized with the air outside. My mind, usually a hive of code and variables, slowed down. I calculated the probability of rescue at 0.0%. My parents were thorough. They chose a pass that wouldn't see traffic until the spring thaw. By then, I would be just another tragic statistic. A frozen monument to their political ambition. Then, a shadow detached itself from the whiteout. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, a final firing of synapses before the dark took over. But the shadow had mass. It moved against the wind with a heavy, mechanical purpose. It wasn't a hiker. It was a silhouette clad in white tactical gear, face obscured by a ballistic mask and thermal goggles, a hunter. My parents hadn't just left me to the elements, they had sent insurance. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. The sound of shattering glass tore through the silence. The rear window imploded, showering me in safety glass that looked like diamonds in the snow. A gloved hand reached in, unlocking the door from the inside. The door was ripped open, and the wind howled, claiming the last pocket of still air. "Secure," a voice said. It was distorted by the mask, but the cadence was unmistakable. The figure stripped off the goggles. 2 familiar gray eyes stared at me, hardened by years I hadn't witnessed. Noah, my brother, the black sheep, the ghost. He didn't waste time with greetings. He moved with an efficiency that was terrifying to watch. He cut my seatbelt with a serrated blade, lifted me out of the car as if I weighed nothing, and carried me through the knee-deep drifts. A modified off-road vehicle idled 50 yards away, its engine a low, guttural growl against the storm. He secured me in the passenger seat and slammed the door. The heat inside hit me like a physical blow, a wall of warmth that made my skin scream as the blood began to rush back to the surface. Noah climbed into the driver's seat, stripping off his gloves. His hands were scarred, steady on the wheel. "You were supposed to be in the Middle East," I whispered, my voice barely a croak. "I was 10 miles behind you," he said, shifting the truck into gear. The vehicle tore through the snow, finding traction where there should have been none. "I flagged the GPS signature on Dad's SUV 3 weeks ago," Noah said, his eyes scanning the terrain. "I saw the life insurance policy renewal hit the server on Tuesday, $2.5 million, Payout contingent on accidental death before age 21. I knew the timeline. I knew the liquidation event was imminent. Liquidation event. He spoke about our parents like they were hostile combatants. And looking at the empty road behind us, I realized he was right. We drove in silence for an hour, descending into a valley where the snow turned to sleet. Noah turned off the main road onto an unmarked logging trail. We navigated through dense timber until we reached the shell of an old ski lodge, abandoned and rotting. He drove around the back, triggered a remote, and a section of the foundation slid open a hidden garage door concealed by faux rock and timber. We rolled into the dark, the door sealing shut behind us. "Welcome home, Sophia," he said. We were underground, safe, buried, just like our parents wanted, but alive. The bunker smelled of ozone and recycled air. It was a sterile, comforting scent, the smell of a machine that worked exactly as designed. I sat in front of a bank of monitors, wrapped in a thermal blanket, watching my life being rewritten in real time. On screen 1, a local news anchor wore a practiced expression of somber concern. "Sources close to the family report a long history of mental instability," she said. Sophia Vance had reportedly stopped taking her medication days before her disappearance. Authorities are treating this as a tragic self-harm incident. My parents weren't just mourning, they were marketing. This was the Whisper campaign. They were seeding the narrative of my suicide before my body had even been found. It was a masterclass in crisis management. If I was crazy, if I was non-compliant, then my death wasn't a crime, it was an inevitability. I didn't throw the remote. I didn't scream. Emotion is just noise in a system that requires precision. I turned to the keyboard. If they wanted to make this about narratives, I would make it about numbers. "What are you doing?" Noah asked from the corner, where he was cleaning a rifle. "Following the money," I said. Richard Vance doesn't do anything without a profit margin. I bypassed their personal firewalls in under 3 minutes. Their passwords were pathetic variations of campaign slogans and birth dates. I was in. I pulled up the family trust, the campaign accounts, and the private ledgers Richard thought were encrypted. The numbers told a story far uglier than the one on the news. Richard's campaign was bleeding cash. He was leveraged to the hilt, owing favors to donors who didn't accept IOUs. Then I saw it. The life insurance policy. $2.5 million. But it wasn't just a policy, it was a deadline. The payout dropped by half if I survived past my 21st birthday. I was 19. The asset was deprecating. That's when I understood. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't even cruelty really, it was just business. To a narcissist, a child isn't a human being, a child is an asset on a balance sheet. For 18 years, I was a high-yield investment. My illness garnered sympathy votes for Richard and charity gala donations for Stephanie. I was a prop that generated social capital. But assets depreciate. The cost of my care, the private doctors, the specialized transport, the hush money, had started to exceed the value I brought in. The maintenance costs were too high. The return on investment had flatlined. I looked at the screen, at the transaction history. They hadn't murdered their daughter. They had liquidated a failing asset. It's a terrifying clarity, realizing your parents didn't kill you because they were monsters in the traditional sense, but because they were accountants of the soul. They had run the numbers, they had looked at the ledger, seen the red ink, and decided to cut their losses. "They're broke," I said, my voice steady. "The campaign debt is staggering. The insurance payout covers the deficit with a 4% surplus." Noah walked over, looking at the spreadsheet glowing on the monitor. "They sold you for a 4% margin?" "They sold me because the math said I was worth more dead," I corrected. "It's the narcissist's ledger. You give, they take. And when you have nothing left to give, you become a liability. And liabilities get written off." I saved the files, every bank transfer, every policy update, every email discussing the timeline. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was the auditor. And I was about to close the books on the Vance administration permanently. "Noah," I said, turning to him. "I need my meds. I can't feel my legs. And if we're going to burn them down, I need to be able to stand and watch." Noah's face went pale. He walked to the medical supply bag he'd stolen from the house. He pulled out the familiar blue vials. But he didn't hand them to me. He held them up to the light, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. "Sophia," he said, "these aren't meds. Pain is usually a warning signal. It tells you something is broken, something is wrong." But as I lay on the cot in the bunker, 3 days after my last injection, the pain wasn't a warning, it was a resurrection. I had expected to fade away. Without the daily blue serum that my mother claimed kept my genetic defect at bay, I assumed my systems would shut down. Instead, they were waking up. And they were screaming. It started in my toes, a prickling heat that felt like walking on needles. Then it moved up my calves, a deep, cramping ache that made me gasp for air. It wasn't the numbness of death, it was the excruciating fire of reconnection. "Make it stop," I gritted out, my hands gripping the metal frame of the bed until my knuckles turned white. "Noah, please. Just give me the dose." Noah didn't move toward me. He stood at the stainless steel workbench on the far side of the room, staring at a mass spectrometer he'd rigged up from salvaged parts. The blue vials I had begged for were lined up in a neat row, glowing innocently under the harsh LED lights. "I can't give you this, Sophia," he said. His voice was devoid of emotion, the tone of a soldier reporting a casualty. "Why? Are you trying to kill me faster?" He turned, holding up a printout of the chemical analysis. "Because you aren't sick. You never were." The words didn't make sense. I had been in a wheelchair since I was 12. I had seen the scans. I had heard the specialists, doctors my father paid for, explain the degeneration of my myelin sheath. "It's a paralytic," Noah said, walking over and dropping the paper onto my chest. "A customized neurotoxin. Low dosage. Administered daily. Enough to suppress motor function, weaken muscle density, and mimic the symptoms of a degenerative disorder without actually killing the host. They haven't been treating a genetic defect. They've been manufacturing one." I stared at the paper. Chemical compounds I recognized from my own secret studies. Suppressors. Sedatives. The realization hit me harder than the cold on the mountain. My disability wasn't a tragedy. It was a cage. They had drugged me. Every morning, with a smile and a glass of orange juice, my mother had poisoned me just enough to keep me in that chair, just enough to keep me compliant. Just enough to harvest my biology for whatever longevity patent they were selling to their investors. "They stole my legs," I whispered. The anger that rose up then wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. "They stole 7 years of my life." I looked at Noah. He was watching me, his face a mask of guilt. And suddenly, the anger found a new target. "You knew," I accused him. "You knew what they were like. That's why you left. You ran away to save yourself, and left me alone with them." It was the question that had haunted me for a decade. Why the strong brother, the protector, had vanished into the night, leaving his little sister to the wolves. Noah didn't flinch. He walked to the edge of the bed and sat down, meeting my gaze with a tensity that made me want to look away. "I didn't run away, Sophia. I deployed." "That's just a fancy word for leaving." "No," he said firmly. "I didn't leave to save myself. I left because I was 18, broke and powerless. If I had stayed, I would have been just another victim. I would have ended up in jail or dead, and you would have been truly alone." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. I realized that to fight monsters like Richard and Stephanie, I couldn't just be a son. I had to become a weapon. I had to learn how to track, how to hack, how to disappear. I joined the contractors to build a war chest. Every paycheck, every mission, every scar, it was all for this. It was all for the moment I could come back and break the lock. This was the invisible chain breaker. He hadn't abandoned the family. He had gone to forge the bolt cutters. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the toll it had taken. The gray in his hair, the scars on his hands. He had turned himself into a ghost so he could one day be my shield. "Help me up," I said. "Sophia, your legs are." "Help me up." He hesitated, then offered his arm. I grabbed it. I swung my legs off the cot. They trembled violently, weak from years of forced atrophy. But the nerves were firing. I put my feet on the concrete floor. I pushed. It hurt. It hurt more than anything I had ever felt. But I stood. I swayed, gripping Noah's arm like a lifeline, but I was upright. I looked at the blue vials on the table. "Don't throw them away," I said, my voice steady. "We're going to need evidence. Survival is a biological imperative. Revenge is a mathematical one. You identify the variables, you isolate the weak points, and you solve for X." In the Vance equation, X was Arthur Vance. He wasn't just the family lawyer, he was the architect of their silence. He drafted the NDAs, he laundered the campaign donations, and he set up the shell companies that paid for my medical research. If my parents were the monsters, Arthur was the man who made sure their claws looked like manicured nails. "He's at the marina," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "His phone GPS has been stationary for 3 hours. He's prepping his yacht. He knows the timeline on the insurance payout is tightening. He's scared." Noah didn't ask for coordinates. He just grabbed his gear. "I'll bring him in." "Don't hurt him," I said, looking at the screen where Arthur's digital life was unraveling under my code. "We don't need a body. We need a witness." Noah didn't smile. "I'll be gentle." 2 hours later, the bunker door hissed open. Noah walked in, guiding a man who looked like he'd seen a ghost. Arthur Vance was wearing a cashmere sweater and deck shoes, but his composure had been stripped away along with his phone and wallet. He stumbled into the room, blinking against the harsh LED lights. When his eyes adjusted, they landed on me. I wasn't in the wheelchair. I was sitting on the edge of the workbench, my legs swinging slightly. "Sophia?" he whispered. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "But," the report said. "The cold. Physics is a tricky thing, Arthur," I said. "It preserves as well as it destroys." "This is kidnapping," he stammered, trying to summon the authority of the courtroom. "This is a felony, Richard will." Richard is currently trying to figure out how to spend $2.5 million that he's never going to see, I interrupted. "And you aren't worried about kidnapping. You're worried because you know exactly what my parents did. You drew up the contracts." I slid off the workbench. My legs were weak, screaming with the effort, but I walked toward him. 1 step, 2. "I know about the biodata harvesting," I said, my voice low and even. "I know about the neurotoxin. I know that my illness was a patent application you filed under a shell corporation in the Caymans." Arthur backed up until he hit the wall. He looked at Noah, who was leaning against the door with his arms crossed, a silent sentinel. Then he looked back at me. The fear in his eyes shifted. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of them. "They're spiraling, Sophia," he croaked. "Richard. He's desperate. The campaign debt is deeper than you know. He told me to increase the dosage. He sent the email last week. He said, 'Expedite the timeline.' He didn't want you to just fade away anymore. He wanted it done." "I know," I said. "That's why you're here. You're the loose end, Arthur. When the insurance investigators start asking questions, who do you think Richard is going to blame? The grieving father? Or the lawyer who handled the paperwork?" Arthur slumped. The fight went out of him. He knew the game better than anyone. He knew that in a world of sharks, the fixer is always the first one eaten. "I kept insurance," he whispered. He reached into his shoe. Noah tensed, hand moving to his belt, but Arthur didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a small silver key. "Bank of Aspen, box 404. It's not digital, it's a hard drive. Air-gapped, encrypted." He looked at me, his eyes wet, with a pathetic mixture of cowardice and hope. "It has the original contracts with the biodata firm, the wire transfers, and the email from Richard ordering the lethal dose. I saved it all. I knew one day he'd turn on me. This was the unexpected ally. Not a hero, but a rat who knew when the ship was sinking." "Write down the combination," I said. He did. Handing me the paper, his hand shook. "What happens to me?" "That depends," I said, taking the key. "On how clearly you speak into the microphone." I looked at Noah. "Get the drive. We have a gala to crash." The Vance Foundation Charity Gala was a spectacle of calculated grief. The ballroom of the Hotel Jerome was draped in black silk and white lilies, a funereal chic that screamed expensive mourning. 500 of Aspen's elite were there, sipping champagne and murmuring condolences, their faces composed in masks of polite sympathy. My parents stood on the stage, bathed in a soft spotlight. They were perfect. Richard wore a black suit that looked slightly too large, suggesting weight lost from sorrow. Stephanie wore a simple black dress, devoid of jewelry, except for a small silver locket, probably empty, but the symbolism was potent. "We lost our angel," Stephanie said into the microphone, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing but not enough to ruin her makeup. "Sophia was our light. And though her body was fragile, her spirit was unbreakable." I sat in the control booth at the back of the ballroom, watching them on the monitors. The tech crew was unconscious, zip-tied in the corner. Noah stood guard at the door, his eyes scanning the room like a radar system. "You ready?" he asked. "Send it," I said. I hit the enter key. The massive projection screen behind my parents flickered, the image of my smiling face a photo from when I was 10, before the wheelchair dissolved into static. The ballroom went silent. My parents turned, confusion rippling through their practiced grief. Then, the video started. It wasn't high definition. It was grainy dashcam footage, time-stamped 3 weeks ago, the interior of the SUV. My father's voice, clear and irritated. "We need to make sure the chair is disabled. If she crawls, she might make it to the road." The crowd gasped. A collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. On screen, my mother's voice responded, cold and pragmatic. "Just do it, Richard. The policy renewal deadline is Tuesday. We can't afford another month of premiums." Richard stepped forward on stage, waving his hands. "Cut the feed. It's a hack. It's a deep fake." But I wasn't done. The screen shifted again. This time, it was a document. The original contract with the biodata firm. The signature line zoomed in. Richard Vance. The payment schedule highlighted. Quarterly deposits of $250,000 for exclusive genetic harvesting rights. Then, the audio from the bunker. Arthur Vance's terrified confession. He told me to increase the dosage. He said, expedite the timeline. He didn't want her to just fade away anymore. He wanted it done. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a predator realizing the prey has teeth. The ballroom doors swung open. I didn't roll in. I walked. It wasn't graceful. I leaned heavily on Noah, my legs trembling with every step, the pain a dull roar in my spine. But I was upright. I was standing. The sight of me, the paralyzed girl, the fragile angel walking into her own funeral, broke the spell. Stephanie brought her hands to her mouth, a scream dying in her throat. Richard looked like he had been shot. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. "Sophia?" he whispered. The microphone picked it up, amplifying his terror to 500 people. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. Noah handed me a wireless mic. I didn't need to shout. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "You said I was unstable," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You said I was sick. You told the world I was a tragedy waiting to happen." I took a step closer, leaving Noah's support. I swayed, but I didn't fall. I wasn't sick. I was poisoned. I wasn't unstable. I was profitable. I pointed to the screen, where the insurance policy was now displayed, the payout clause, glowing in red letters. $2.5 million. That was the price of my life. That was the line item on your ledger. "This is a lie!" Richard shouted, his politician's instinct kicking in, desperate and loud. She's mentally ill. This is a delusion." "Is it?" I asked. "Then why can I walk?" I took another step. "You drugged me for 7 years to keep me in that chair. You sold my blood, you sold my future, and when I became too expensive to keep, you tried to throw me away." I looked at Stephanie. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time, tears of ruin. "I am not a burden, Mother," I said. "I am the evidence." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The blue lights began to flash against the high windows. "And the audit," I said, "is finished. The end of an empire doesn't always look like a fire. Sometimes, it just looks like handcuffs." The police swarmed the stage before my father could finish his denial. Arthur Vance, true to his survival instinct, had already handed over the physical evidence to the district attorney an hour before the gala began. The arrest was live-streamed to millions. I watched Stephanie try to use her grieving mother persona on the arresting officer. But it's hard to sell grief when the corpse is standing 10 feet away, testifying against you. Richard didn't fight, he just looked at me. For a second, I thought I saw regret. Then I realized he wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at the $2.5 million evaporating into the ether. He was doing the math on his legal fees. He was calculating the cost of prison. I walked out of the ballroom. I didn't stay to watch them get shoved into the squad cars. I didn't need to see it. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. 6 months later, the snow in Aspen had melted, revealing the scars on the mountain where the avalanche had been triggered. My parents were awaiting trial on charges ranging from insurance fraud to attempted murder and human trafficking. Their assets were seized. Their reputation was ash. I sat on the balcony of a new office building in downtown Denver. The sign on the glass door read Vance Tech, Data Sovereignty and Patient Defense. I wasn't just coding anymore. I was building a shield. We were designing encryption protocols to protect medical records from unauthorized access, ensuring no other child's biology could be sold to the highest bidder without a fight. Noah walked onto the balcony, handing me a mug of tea. He didn't carry a gun anymore, but his eyes still scanned the horizon, a habit that would never truly fade. "The lawyers called," he said, leaning against the railing. "The trust fund is unlocked. Full restitution. Plus damages. Put it in the company," I said. "We need better servers." He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "You could buy an island, you know, disappear." "I'm done disappearing," I said. I looked down at my legs. They were still weak. I still used a cane on bad days. But they were mine. Every step I took was a defiance of gravity and genetics and greed. The winter had been long. It had been cold enough to freeze blood and stop hearts, but it hadn't stopped mine. I looked up at the sky. It was a brilliant, piercing blue. The kind of sky that promises a thaw. They tried to freeze me out, but they only preserved the evidence. Share this story if you believe the truth always melts the ice.